Good morning. It's Monday, August 4th, on a cool, drizzly Western Carolina morning. It's 62 degrees outside, and today our session will be discussion of two major pieces of federal legislation which have really affected our lives as educators over the last 14 years. And the first one we'll be talking about is No Child Left Behind. This was a significant piece of legislation that was drafted by President George Bush, and also, along with the support of Senator Ted Kennedy, signed into law in 2001. And along with it became a new attempt by the federal government to direct change, significant change, for the sake of improving our public schools. Three major pieces of this legislation need to be mentioned. First of all, accountability. And we've all heard about accountability for a long time in our work, and it seems to become a very important part and a term that we use with great repetition in terms of trying to understand what it means. In No Child Left Behind, it seemed to suggest that states would be held accountable, and states in turn would be looking to local school districts in terms of their progress, and if school districts and states did not meet certain goals, then sanctions would be established. And choice was also a second piece of this legislation, which had been talked about for a long time, but now would become part of the law. And choice in the fact that if parents were not satisfied with their child's education at a particular school, then they could opt out for another, and districts would then be required to foot the bill on transportation expenses, which would really have a significant impact on some schools and school districts in terms of meeting the fiscal impact of that. And finally, flexibility. And we tried to understand a lot in terms of what did that mean, what kind of flexibility were the feds talking about when they discussed this term in the federal law. So accountability, as we mentioned earlier, really referred to testing in grades 3 through 8 in reading and math. And we used FCAT in Florida as primarily the main means of trying to measure accountability and measure progress. Now, the problem with accountability that we ran into early on with No Child Left Behind is a term called proficiency target. And the proficiency targets changed each year. And in the legislation, states were given 12 years to reach the point to where all children would be able to read at grade level, and which we all knew, those of us that practiced this work, we were never going to reach that. That was just an impossible goal, and each year the target moved, and it became very difficult for us to begin to make any progress toward that. And we began to understand that this was simply a political term. It was used to make folks feel good about a piece of legislation that was going to hold educators' feet to the fire, but really it was one that condemned schools to failure all across the country. And the closer we got to the end of the proficiency target, the more folks began to realize that. But we did see some breakdowns in assessment that we did appreciate and were considered valuable, in that we took a look at ethnicity, we took a look at LEP, we took a look at poverty, we took a look at disabled children, and we began to really analyze the data and try to come up with strategies as to how to improve progress, educational progress with each of these unique groups. So some of that really proved to be pretty beneficial, and we still use that, as you know. Choice, again, as I mentioned earlier, placed a significant barrier on districts in terms of funding, transportation costs, and those of us who have worked in this business for a long time understand that transportation is very, very significant. It takes a lot of money to run the buses each and every day. But the emphasis upon reading proved to be a very important change, and one that was very helpful in terms of moving a lot of schools forward, especially in a program called Reading First. In K-3, in pre-K, we began to implement some strategies that were research-based, proven strategies to help children learn. For the first time, we began to really implement scientific-based reading strategies. We insisted upon highly qualified teachers, although that definition also seemed to be a moving target depending upon which state you might work in. And also, for the first time, parents had the opportunity to move their children from a school that they deemed unsafe. And schools were required to report safety statistics to the federal government, and districts were required to report those statistics, although that seemed to be pushed to the back oftentimes and was really not paid much attention to by school districts or by the media. So No Child Left Behind began to lose its steam toward the end of the Bush administration, and as President Obama came in 2008, certainly with his domestic agenda, he proposed another sweeping piece of federal legislation designed to help the schools improve. This time it was not a bipartisan program. It was more of a Democratic program called Race to the Top. And Race to the Top employed a lot of the same things that No Child Left Behind, with a couple of things that were a little bit different. For example, there was a huge emphasis upon technology and data and competitive teaching grants, etc., that made the grant a little bit different, or made the program a little bit different than No Child Left Behind. I know working in the schools in those days, we saw a lot of money come in to support building an infrastructure for technology that we had not seen before. And with the help of federal dollars, we were able to really upgrade the capability of our school district to make sure every student had access to the internet with a computer that was usable in order to test on, etc., etc. Let me talk just a minute in Race to the Top by using Hillsborough County School District as an example of a district that took the ball and ran with it with Race to the Top, but also by earning a Gates grant. The Bill Gates Foundation allowed Hillsborough County with a $100 million grant to really take all Race to the Top was about, in addition to other research-based strategies, and really move the ball forward in trying to improve the Hillsborough County schools. That is an ongoing project. One of the things that we noticed early on when Hillsborough County won the grant was a term called transparency. We hear a lot about transparency, although a lot of us really don't really know what that means too much. But in the case of Hillsborough County, it meant sharing of information from all stakeholders so that we could watch progress take place, identify problems, and through a committed effort with administration, teachers, the union, parents, community, everybody would be able to move forward. And that seems to be a very successful program so far. Hillsborough County is one of the 5 school districts throughout the nation that everyone is watching in terms of teacher reform, improved and different pay practices that we'll discuss a little bit later on with some Florida legislation. But it began to be a way in which, once again, we were able to watch research-based teaching strategies and also specific teacher performance that we could measure in a way to improve student instruction. We've seen the implementation of Common Core strategies, not necessarily a piece of Race to the Top, but it grew out of the effort to try and improve the public schools probably just as much as Race to the Top has done. So when we look at your question and the forum on this particular week's assignment, I want you to think about the fact, or do you agree that Race to the Top and No Child Left Behind is largely responsible for Florida's steady improvement in student achievement? In other words, we've lived with accountability for a long time, and we know that Florida is moving ahead rapidly in terms of its status among our states in improving schools. So do you attribute that to these two key pieces of legislation? Yes or no, and explain your answer. So that's, in a nutshell, is a summary of these two important pieces of legislation. So I look forward to your responses. Have a good week.